Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, menders, fenders and money lenders, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. And welcome to the 21st century, folks. I have until recently been using an iPad which must have been used by Wilfred Owen in the trenches. It was so terrible, and I'm glad to be coming to you in a little bit more of sharper recording. There are many advantages, of course, to this modern technology, but it does mean that the file sizes are enormous, and also this Canon EOS 2000 doesn't record in excess of 12 minutes, so I'm going to be forced to truncate much of my masterful wisdom and yeah, stop perambulating and warbling around and, you know, splattering the camera with all sorts of gums. I'm going to have to get to the main issue in question. So let us do that, folks. Today we are reviewing Henry James's 1880 novel Washington Square, in which a forceful, imperative, brutal, intelligent, wizened medical practitioner by the name of Dr. Slope is operating in the city of New York and is widowed and has a young daughter called Catherine. Is it Sloper or Slope? Catherine Sloper. And he is initially sort of cheered and excited by her moral and personal development, but finds that she is somewhat lacking in the intellectual department, as it were. She is a little bit dull, she's a little bit dim, she's, you know, what would the idiom have us say? She doesn't hurt a fly. I mean, in my opinion, you can have, you know, a concubine in a basement chained to a radiator. You can, you know, go out trucking and killing prostitutes. You can do anything. You can have tea with Jeffrey Epstein for all I like. But if you are boring, then my goodness, you're going to be excommunicated from my friendship circle. And boredom is her key, a deficit, one of her defects, and she is under the stewardship in Washington Square, where they live, of Mrs. Lavinia Penniman, quite the name there from Mr. James, and Lavinia Penniman is a sort of endearingly cunning and conniving widow herself. Her husband has passed as well, as you might expect, and yeah, she's the sister of Mr. Slope, of Dr. Sloper, and yeah, they have many nice bristling back and forths which punctuates most of the novel's events. But yes, so she is in charge of her, she's tutoring her, and even she has to admit that although Catherine is harmless, she is therefore, you know, boring and not so much dim-witted, but sort of really mild-mannered and very, very reticent, and yeah, therefore just not only unexciting, but unexcitable. Not only can she not inspire, you know, jest or love or excitement in other people, but she is somehow impervious or immune to its allure from others, seemingly, and pretty soon Dr. Sloper starts to exert a kind of supercilious schadenfreude over Catherine. He seems to delight in her dim-wittedness and her, you know, her mundanity and her inability to muster, you know, even the most sort of basic of personality traits. And lo and behold, Miss Catherine goes to a dinner one evening held by a sort of a distant family relative and runs into a Morris Townsend who, to the astonishment of seemingly Mr. James and every one of his readers, apportions a great deal of his time for Miss Catherine. He is an attractive and mild-mannered and chiselled, enigmatic, charismatic, all the, you know, he's got all the appurtenances of a man about town. For some reason, he is very, very, very interested in Catherine Sloper, and we are suspicious of that. And of course, is Dr. Sloper. He regards it as a sort of errant from Mr. Townsend to have fallen in love with Catherine, if indeed it is love, or he regards it as a sort of a juvenile misapprehension of the woman he sees before him. Mrs. Penniman is loving it as well. She's lapping it up. She's living vicariously via Catherine because she is a slightly older, she's probably middle-aged, 40 or 50s, and yeah, she just, as much as Catherine does, delights in the presence of an attractive and charismatic male. Then we go on and on and on, and their sort of their crepuscular meetings in Washington Square and their sort of hiding their affections for one another soon starts to dissipate, and they are essentially candid lovers after that, and although Catherine has her mother's fortune to rely upon, she is also going to, not need, but she's also awaiting an enormous fortune from her father. He's a pretty successful doctor, medical practitioner in his own right, so when he does eventually cop it, he will be the one that gives her many, many thousands of pounds, we're led to believe. And so, quite rightly, the Doctor is aware that it could just be financial desperation on the part of Maurice Townsend, rather than any deep-seated, heartfelt, ceaseless, imperturbable love on Mr. Townsend's part. But yeah, we go on and on and on. The Doctor eventually goes to Mrs. Montgomery, who is the sister of Maurice Townsend, to get a second opinion and to get an appraisal of him, and he eventually, very, very cleverly extracts a bit of a confession from her, and she is eventually, just as they're on the threshold of leaving, when they're on the doorstep, Miss Montgomery says, please do not allow her to marry him. In other words, she will therefore be in his thrall and, under his thumb for the entirety of her life. So what I'm saying is an immense positive of this novel is that we sympathise with absolutely everybody. There are no Dickensian gargoyles in this that are irredeemable, priggish conservatives, rational people who are rightly cautious about malefactors or just idiots that their daughter shouldn't be conversing with, will sympathise with Dr. Sloper, the acrimonious and what would you say, really rather inquisitive of us, those nosy gits that like to know about other people's lives, will be really empathetic with Mrs. Penniman, and even all of the despondent, love-forlorn individuals, which I think probably number 80% of my watching audience, will of course empathise and sympathise with Miss Sloper, who has seemingly never really had many of the affections of those people that surround her. But I've got two sections that I wanted to highlight for you folks, and then a few bits of criticism, because I don't just perambulate and talk around a book. I like to cut it open by the middle, spill out its giblets, and see what is in its biological fundament, see what's making it tick or not, see how it works, how its systems work. We've got a few quotations first. This is of Catherine Sloper. In her younger years, she was a good deal of a romp. And though it is an awkward confession to make about one's heroine, I must add that she was something of a glutton. She never, that I know of, stole raisins out of the pantry, but she devoted her pocket money to the purchase of cream cakes. As regards this, however, a critical attitude would be inconsistent with a candid reference to the early annals of any biographer. Catherine was decidedly not clever. She was not quick with her book, nor indeed with anything else. She was not abnormally deficient. There's the subtlety, the prototypically Victorian subtlety, where she was not abnormally deficient, and she mustered learning enough to acquit herself respectably in conversation with her contemporaries, among whom it must be avowed, however, that she occupied a secondary place. So that's what we're getting with Catherine. And then we have her struggling with the dilemma between, not wanting to anger or in any way seek to contravene her father, and also, of course, what would you say? Just accepting the love of a willing suitor. So this is when Dr. Sloper asserts that it's quite probably a financial reason as much as it is a romantic reason why it is that Maurice Townsend is so almost supernaturally concerned with Catherine Sloper. Catherine stood staring, and the Doctor enjoyed the point he had made about it probably being avarice. It came to Catherine with the force, or rather with the vague impressiveness of a logical axiom which it was not in her province to controvert, and yet, though it was a scientific truth, she felt wholly unable to accept it. We've all been at that point, I'm sure, where somebody issues what is an ineluctable statement and something that, were it not you in that situation, you would obviously just nod along and say, yes, that's absolutely the tram line along which you must travel, when in fact your heart, your deep inner sincerity wants to do something very, very different. So yes, this is very, very enjoyable. I was effusive in my praise of A Portrait of a Lady, which is Henry James' probably his most notable work. I think a little bit earlier maybe. This is much more concise, of course, and yeah, I mean, it's a battered and hackneyed cliche to say that Henry James's prose is, what, fluent and seems to be moulded to every reader's mindset. You know, there are no there are no sort of textual bear traps or any sort of weeds or any sort of branches in your way. It's a real sort of procession, and you never really feel that you have to properly strain. Your eyes can flit across pages and pages and chapters without you ever having to consult your consciousness and saying, oh, have I ever understood this bit? So that's a bit of a cliche, but nonetheless needs to be included. Yeah, everybody can be sympathised with in this novel. If there is something else, if there is one negative, it's that it's not a great exercise in world building. You know, obviously it's in New York and you know, the eponymous Washington Square, but we don't learn an awful lot about it. Mrs. Penniman meets them on occasion in bits of New York, but it could easily happen in a bathtub or on a washing line. There's not an awful lot of world building on there, folks, but yeah, I hope I managed to, you know, as I say, truncate and condense some of my marvellous, ineluctable criticism into about 12 minutes, but my iPad tells me that 12 minutes is running thin, so I will probably conclude here, and thank you ever so much for watching BookTube, and goodbye.